I never imagined that two siblings could hate each other so much as to destroy one another right in front of me, but what they revealed that day in my courtroom surpassed anything I had heard in 20 years as a judge. Before I begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching this video from so I can see how far it has reached. I'm Judge Monique Davis. I'm 47 years old, born in Chicago, and I thought I had seen it all. Complicated custody cases, messy divorces, inheritance disputes ending in violence. But nothing, absolutely nothing prepared me for the day Marcus and Diane Thompson walked into my courtroom. The case seemed simple on paper, a dispute over their late mother Eleanor Thompson's inheritance. A house in the suburbs valued at $300,000, some bank accounts, personal belongings, the usual. Marcus, the older brother at 38, demanded that the house be sold and the money split. Diane, 35, insisted on keeping the referred property because she claimed she had cared for their mother for the last 5 years while Marcus disappeared. When they walked in that March morning, the tension was palpable. Marcus wore a suit, calculating, with the coldness of someone who has rehearsed every word. Diane wore simple clothes, deep dark circles under her eyes, trembling hands. They didn't look at each other once as they sat down. Marcus's lawyer began by stating that his client had just as much legal right to the inheritance as his sister. That physical absence didn't mean abandonment, that Marcus had contributed financially when he could, that the law was clear about equitable division. All very proper, very professional. Then it was Diane's lawyer's turn to speak, and that's when everything started to go wrong. He presented Eleanor's medical records. Advanced Alzheimer's for the last 3 years. Bills showing Diane had quit her nursing job to care for her full-time. Photographs of Diane with her mother in the hospital, therapy sessions, at home. And none, not a single photograph of Marcus. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His lawyer objected, saying emotional contributions had no legal weight over the established inheritance rights. Technically, he was right. But then Diane asked permission to speak directly. What came out of her mouth chilled my blood. She said Marcus hadn't just been absent. She said she knew exactly why their mother had developed Alzheimer's so aggressively. That it wasn't just genetics or bad luck. That their mother never got over what Marcus did to her when they were 17 and 14 years old respectively. Marcus stood up yelling that it was irrelevant, that it was lies, that it had nothing to do with the case. His lawyer tried to calm him. I struck the gavel demanding order. I allowed Diane to continue, warning her she could only present information pertinent to the inheritance case. Diane pulled out an envelope. Inside, there were letters. Letters written by Eleanor over 20 years, never sent, found after her death. Letters addressed to Marcus that she never had the courage to deliver. Letters where Eleanor described her pain, her guilt, her inability to process what she had discovered. Diane began to read excerpts with a broken voice. Eleanor wrote that one night in 1999, she heard strange noises in the basement. She went down and found Marcus with his best friend. But they weren't doing what any mother would expect from two teenagers experimenting. They were burning something. Burning clothes. Girls' clothes. Clothes Eleanor recognized because they belonged to the 7-year-old daughter of their neighbor. The room fell into absolute silence. Diane continued. Eleanor wrote that she confronted Marcus, who cried, who begged, who swore they had only scared the girl, that his friend had crossed the line, but he hadn't touched anyone. Eleanor wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But when the police came asking days later because the girl finally spoke up, Eleanor lied. She said Marcus had been home all afternoon. She gave him an alibi. Marcus was pale, sweating, shaking his head repeatedly. His lawyer demanded this be stopped, saying these were unfounded legal accusations, that the statute of limitations had passed, that it didn't apply in a civil inheritance trial. I knew he was right. Legally, this should not have been happening in my courtroom, but something inside me needed to hear the rest. Diane explained that Eleanor carried that guilt for the rest of her life, that she never knew if she did the right thing protecting her son, that the girl, that little 7-year-old, grew up with severe trauma, that her family moved away, that Eleanor never could apologize because admitting the truth meant destroying Marcus, and that, according to those letters, Eleanor believed her mental illness, the chronic depression that eventually led to accelerated cognitive decline, came directly from that secret rotting inside her for decades. Marcus finally exploded. He shouted that Diane had always been the favorite, that their mother was a hypocrite, that, yes, he had been there that afternoon, but he was just a kid, that his friend did everything, that he was just scared and didn't know how to react, that he had lived 30 years with that guilt, that he distanced himself from the family precisely because he couldn't bear his mother's gaze, that he didn't deserve to be punished forever for a teenage mistake. Diane shouted back too, that mistake ruined the life of an innocent girl, that their mother died without peace of mind protecting him, that she had to hold Eleanor as she cried at night, not understanding why, until she found the letters after the funeral, that Marcus didn't deserve a single cent of the woman he destroyed. I had to call a 2-hour recess because the situation was unbearable. In my office, I reviewed the law. Diane was right morally, but Marcus was right legally. There was no clause allowing me to deny him his inheritance based on unresolved actions from 30 years ago. Diane's caregiving contributions were also insufficient under Illinois law to grant her majority inheritance without a specific will, stating so. Eleanor had died without an updated will. The last one was from 1985, when both children were minors, distributing everything equally. I returned to the courtroom burdened with the hardest decision of my career. I looked at Marcus, that 38-year-old man still carrying the ghost of his 17-year-old self. I looked at Diane, exhausted from carrying everyone's pain. And I thought of Eleanor, trapped between maternal love and moral conscience until her mind simply shut down. I pronounced my verdict. Legally, the inheritance would be divided 50-50 as Illinois intestacy law dictated. The house would be sold and the money distributed equally between Marcus and Diane Thompson. Relief instantly showed on Marcus's face. Devastation in Diane, heartbreaking. But it wasn't over. I added that, as a condition for accessing his share, Marcus had to sign a statement admitting his involvement in the 1999 events, and that 75% of his inheritance would be placed in a trust fund exclusively for organizations working with child victims of sexual abuse. He would receive the remaining 25% in cash. If he rejected these conditions, his entire share would automatically transfer to Diane. Marcus's lawyer protested furiously. He argued that I was overstepping my judicial authority. Technically, I might have been on shaky ground, but I used a rarely applied precedent allowing judges in intestate inheritance cases to impose conditions when there is evidence of demonstrable moral harm caused by one heir to the deceased. Eleanor's letters were that evidence. Marcus had two options: publicly accept responsibility and allocate most of his inheritance to symbolically repair the kind of harm he caused, or give up everything. The room was silent for minutes that felt like hours. Finally, Marcus signed. He left my courtroom that day with $75,000, but with his secret turned into public record. Diane received her full half, plus the satisfaction that her mother's money would at least partly serve something good. I couldn't sleep that night. I know I technically acted within my legal limits, but barely. I know my ruling was appealable and probably criticized by stricter colleagues, but I also know that sometimes justice can't be just about paragraphs in legal codes. Eleanor died trapped between law and morality, between protecting her son and doing the right thing. That contradiction literally ate her alive. I couldn't give her the peace she never had in life, but I could try to make her death mean at least something more than two siblings fighting over money. Weeks later, I received a letter from Diane. She thanked me not for the money, but because she finally felt someone had heard her mother's pain, that someone had validated that what happened 30 years ago did matter, that it wasn't just things of the past. I never knew what happened to Marcus after that. If he used his money for therapy, to start over, or simply to disappear again. But I know that the 7-year-old girl from 1999, now a 37-year-old woman, somewhere in this country, indirectly received something she never had. Acknowledgement that what happened to her was real, was serious, and had consequences. It wasn't perfect justice, probably not even complete justice. But it was the closest I could give 3 women destroyed by the secret of a teenager who never really faced what he did. This case changed me. It reminded me that behind every file there are entire lives, secrets that rot families from within, impossible decisions someone has to make. And that sometimes, just sometimes, the scales of justice have to weigh something more than laws. They have to weigh broken hearts, inherited guilt, and silences that kill as effectively as any weapon. That was my most painful ruling, and I will carry it with me for the rest of my career. I only want the content of the text translated without any explanation or indication. I remember that Monday morning perfectly. The room was unusually silent when they entered. To my left, Marcus Thompson, 32 years old, impeccable gray suit, jaw clenched as if holding back a volcano. To my right, his younger sister, Diane Thompson, 28 years old, discreet black dress, eyes red but defiant. Between them, an abyss that seemed to swallow all the oxygen from the room. The case in the documents seemed relatively simple: a dispute over their deceased father's inheritance, Harold Thompson, and the custody of their mother, Patricia Thompson, diagnosed with advanced dementia. Cases like this frequently cross my desk. Families torn apart by money, by property, by the weight of responsibilities no one wants to assume. I thought it would be just another file in my career, another sad reminder of how pain can turn love into war. But from the first testimony, I knew I was wrong. Marcus was the first to testify. His voice was firm, almost mechanical, as if he had rehearsed every word for weeks. He explained that his father had entrusted him with the management of the family estate during his lifetime, that he was the one who took care of the business, who sacrificed personal opportunities to keep afloat the hardware store Harold had built over 40 years. He presented documents, emails, employee testimonies, everything meticulously organized. Then Diane asked to speak, and something in her tone made me sit up straight. "My brother is lying, Your Honor," she said with a calmness that contrasted with the storm about to break. "He didn't take care of the business. He looted it. And not only that, there are things this court needs to know about why our father really died." The silence that followed was so dense I could feel it pressing against my temples. Marcus's lawyer immediately stood up, objecting, but I raised my hand. Something in my instinct told me I needed to hear this. "Please continue, Miss Thompson," I said. Diane took a deep breath, and I saw her hands tremble slightly as she gripped the edge of the witness stand. "My father didn't die of a natural heart attack. He had been receiving incorrect medication for months. His blood pressure drug doses were gradually altered. I have pharmacy records showing discrepancies between what was prescribed and what was administered to him." Marcus stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. It's a vile, baseless accusation." I ordered silence in the room. My heart was pounding. This was no longer just a dispute over inheritance. It was becoming something much darker. I asked Diane to provide evidence. With trembling hands, she handed a folder to my secretary. Inside were copies of medical prescriptions, pharmacy records, and something more disturbing, a diary. Their mother, Patricia's diary, written before dementia consumed her completely. Pages and pages describing how Harold had been feeling worse and worse, how Marcus insisted on handling the medications because Dad can't remember what to take anymore. My mother started to suspect. Diane continued, her voice breaking. That's why she began writing everything down. But when she tried to talk to me, Marcus convinced her it was just confusion from her illness. He isolated her from me, changed the locks on the house, limited my visits. When I finally managed to see Dad 2 weeks before he died, he looked like a ghost. Marcus's lawyer was frantically reviewing documents, his face increasingly pale. Marcus, for his part, had gone from indignation to a disturbing calm. Then, he did something I didn't expect. He laughed, a short, bitter laugh completely out of place. "You want to talk about secrets, Diane?" he said, turning to her with an expression I will never forget. It wasn't exactly hatred. It was something more complex, more painful. It was betrayal mixed with desperation. "Do you really want us to open that box?" Diane went pale. "Marcus, no." "Your Honor," Marcus addressed me directly. "My sister conveniently omits that she is not Harold Thompson's biological daughter, that she is the product of an affair my mother had 29 years ago, that our father only found out 2 years ago, and it nearly destroyed his marriage." The air left the room. Diane staggered slightly, clutching the podium. "And you want to know what else I discovered?" Marcus continued, raising his voice. "That she was blackmailing Dad. That she threatened to tell everyone, to destroy his reputation in the community unless he changed his will to benefit her. equally, as if she had any right after all the lies. "That's not true," Diane shouted. "I never blackmailed him. He confessed to me because he felt guilty. Guilty for how he had treated me differently all my life, for the distance I always felt without understanding why. He wanted to make amends. It was his decision. I called for a recess. I needed to process what I was hearing. In my office, with the door closed, I allowed myself a moment of overwhelm. This case had gone from a property dispute to involving possible negligent homicide, blackmail, devastating family secrets, and a sick mother trapped in the crossfire of her children. I ordered further investigations. The police got involved to examine Diane's claims about the medication. I hired a medical specialist to review Harold's records. Each day brought new revelations, like layers of a rotten onion that had to be peeled carefully. The medical investigation revealed that there were indeed inconsistencies in the SIT. Harold's medication, but criminal intent could not be proven. The doses were wrong, yes, but the chain of responsibility was confusing. Pharmacists, home nurses, Harold himself with his deteriorated memory. Regarding the blackmail, there was no tangible evidence, only Marcus's word against Diane's. The will had been modified, true, but Harold was of sound mind when he did so, as confirmed by the lawyer who drafted it. And Patricia, the mother, the silent victim of this entire tragedy, remained in a care facility, unaware of the battle her children were fighting in her name. The time came to issue the sentence. I looked at the two siblings, sitting on opposite sides of the room, and saw not just two adults in conflict, but two children hurt by secrets they never asked to carry. I stood up, aware that the words I was about to pronounce would change the course of two lives forever, and that no decision could heal the damage already done. Justice may be blind, but I am not, and what I had witnessed in that room would haunt me long after the gavel fell. I took a deep breath before speaking. The room was so silent I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above my head. I looked at my notes, although I already knew what I was going to say. I had rehearsed these words through sleepless nights, modifying them, questioning them, knowing that whoever the outcome, someone would leave this room feeling betrayed by the system that was supposed to protect them. As for the inheritance of Harold Thompson's estate, I began, my voice echoing in the room. I have thoroughly reviewed all the submitted documentation. The modified will from 18 months ago is legal and valid. Harold Thompson was of sound mind when he drafted it, as confirmed by 3 independent medical professionals. Therefore, the assets will be divided as stipulated in that document. 60% to Marcus Thompson, 40% to Diane Thompson. I saw Diane close her eyes, absorbing the blow. Marcus remained still, but I noticed his shoulders relax slightly. However, I continued, and that word made both tense up again. The administration of the estate and the handling of Patricia Thompson's affairs present more serious complications. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. This was the part that had robbed me of sleep for weeks, because this was not just about money or property. It was about a sick, vulnerable woman caught in the middle of a war she couldn't even understand. The allegations made by Miss Thompson concerning medication manipulation are extremely serious, I said, looking directly at Marcus. The police investigation found insufficient evidence to file criminal charges. There is no proof of intent. But there was negligence. Negligence that, Mr. Thompson, occurred under your direct supervision of your father's care. Marcus turned pale. His lawyer whispered something, but he ignored it. The records show that you hired nurses without properly verifying their credentials, that you changed pharmacies 3 times in 6 months without correctly transferring medical records. That, on at least 4 documented occasions, your father received incorrect doses due to communication errors that could have been avoided with more diligent oversight. I paused, allowing each word to sink in. I cannot prove you intentionally harmed your father, but I can establish that your negligence contributed to the deterioration of his health in his final months. Tears ran down Diane's cheeks, but not from triumph. They were tears confirming something she already knew in her heart. Therefore, I continued, although the will remains as is, the legal custody and management of Patricia Thompson's affairs cannot remain exclusively in your hands, Mr. Thompson. Marcus stood up abruptly. Your Honor, I have cared for my mother for 2 years. I've paid every bill, every medication, every sit down, Mr. Thompson. I ordered firmly. I'm not finished. I waited for him to sit before continuing. Custody of Patricia Thompson will be shared. Both siblings will have equal access and responsibility. Additionally, I will appoint an independent legal guardian who will oversee all medical and financial decisions concerning her care. Both must report to this guardian, and no major decision can be made without the consensus of both parties. That's impossible, Marcus muttered. We can't even be in the same room without, then you will learn, I interrupted, my voice now harder, because your mother is not to blame for the secrets that tore this family apart. She did not ask for the illness consuming her, and she deserves better than to be a pawn in the war between you. I turned my attention to Diane. And you, Miss Thompson. While I understand the pain of discovering the truth about your heritage in such a traumatic way, you must also accept your share of responsibility. Phone records show you had limited contact with your father during the last 5 years of his life. You only increased your visits in the last year, coinciding with the period when he revealed the truth about your parentage. Diane opened her mouth to protest, but I raised my hand. I am not saying your intentions were mercenary, but perception matters. And your brother is right to question why that approach coincided with changes in the will. The room felt underwater, heavy, and suffocating. I could see both siblings processing my words, looking for partial victories in a verdict that gave neither everything they wanted. But I wasn't finished. What came next was the hardest part. There is one more thing I must address, I said, my voice dropping slightly. During these weeks of testimonies and investigations, something has become clear to me. You two are not villains. Neither of you is the monster. The other has painted. You are two people deeply wounded by secrets that poisoned your family for decades. I looked at Marcus. You grew up as the eldest son, carrying expectations and responsibilities, only to discover that your sister, whom you may have always felt was treated differently, did not share your blood. That revelation doesn't justify negligence, but explains the resentment that led to poor decisions. Then I looked at Diane. And you grew up feeling that distance without understanding it, questioning why you never felt fully a part of the family, only to discover your intuition was correct. That doesn't justify the perceived opportunism, but it explains the urgency to finally be recognized. I leaned forward, my voice heavy with the emotion I had been holding back throughout the process. But here is the truth neither of you wants to hear. Harold Thompson loved you both. The documents I have reviewed, the letters he wrote, the testimonies of those who knew him, all point to an imperfect man who made mistakes but loved his two children. Because that's what they were to him, both of them. Biology does not define love. I saw both siblings avoid looking at each other, their faces reflecting complex emotions neither could fully untangle. Patricia Thompson is not to blame either, I continued. She made a mistake decades ago, one she has paid for with years of silent guilt. And now, when she most needs her children united, when she is most vulnerable, you are here, tearing each other apart with truths that should have come to light years ago, in healthier ways. I paused, letting the silence speak for a moment. This court orders that, in addition to the aforementioned provisions, both will participate in mandatory family mediation. I cannot force you to love each other again, but I can demand you learn to coexist civilly for your mother's sake. I struck the gavel softly, a sound that seemed to thunder through the absolute silence of the room. Case closed. But as I watched Marcus and Diane leave through opposite doors, avoiding even sharing the same hallway, I knew nothing was truly closed. I had separated them legally, hoping they would eventually find their way back to each other. But justice can only do so much. The rest was up to them. That night, in my office, I stayed late reviewing the final documents of the Thompson case. The city glittered through my window, indifferent to the human drama I had just witnessed. I filed the papers in their respective folders, but I knew this case would not be so easily stored away in the compartments of my memory. There was something in the way Marcus had looked at his sister just before leaving the room. It wasn't pure hatred. It was something more complex, more painful. It was recognition. As if for a second he had seen the girl he used to defend on the schoolyard before everything got complicated. 3 weeks later, I received a call I wasn't expecting. It was Jennifer Chen, the legal guardian assigned to oversee the care of Patricia Thompson. Her voice sounded tense when she asked for an urgent meeting. We met in my office on a Tuesday morning, and what she told me made the whole case take a turn I had never anticipated. "Patricia is lucid," Jennifer told me without preamble. "Not all the time, but she has moments of absolute clarity. And there is something she wants to tell the court, something she insists you must know." A chill ran down my spine. "What is it about?" Jennifer leaned forward, her hands clasped on my desk. "She says there is another will, one that Harold wrote just a week before he died, and she claims to know where it is. Protocol dictated that I should immediately summon both parties and formally reopen the case. But something in Jennifer's expression stopped me. "There's more, isn't there?" She nodded slowly. "Patricia says that final will changes everything. Not in terms of money or property. She says it contains a letter, a complete explanation of decisions Harold made, truths he never had the courage to say in life." Jennifer paused. "And she says Marcus knows about its existence. That Harold told him exactly where it was kept." Betrayal. That word floated in my mind like toxic smoke. If Marcus had deliberately concealed a more recent will, that was not only dishonest, it was criminal. But something didn't add up. Why did Patricia wait until now to reveal it? "Because she just remembered," Jennifer answered. "The illness is cruel that way. It can erase decades and then return specific moments with crystal clear clarity. Yesterday, during one of her lucid windows, she told me everything. She was distressed, crying, saying her children needed to know the whole truth before they destroyed themselves completely. That afternoon, I convened an emergency hearing. The room was tenser than ever when Marcus and Diane entered, confused by the urgency. Neither knew what was about to be revealed. I watched Marcus carefully. As I explained, there was new evidence that needed to be examined. His face remained expressionless, but I noticed his hands clenching into fists beneath the table. "Mr. Thompson," I said directly, "did your father ever speak to you about an additional will? One drafted in his final days?" The silence that followed was deafening. Diane turned toward her brother, her eyes widening with growing comprehension and horror. Marcus remained motionless for a long moment, his jaw clenched. When he finally spoke, his voice came out hoarse, defeated. "Yes." That monosyllable dropped like a bomb in the room. Marcus's lawyer attempted to intervene, but Marcus stopped him with a wave of his hand. "Yes," he told me. "He told me where it was kept. And yes, I knew throughout this whole process that it existed." Diane stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "How could you? How could you lie like that?" But Marcus wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, and there was something in his eyes that wasn't the arrogance he had shown during prior hearings. It was shame. "Because I read it, Your Honor. Before Dad died, he told me where it was and asked me to read it after his death. And when I did, when I saw what he had written, I decided it was better left hidden." "That wasn't your decision," I said firmly, though my heart was racing. "Where is that document?" Marcus ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking years older. "In a safe deposit box at First National Bank. I have the key. But, Your Honor, before I open it, you need to understand something. My father was not in his right mind when he wrote it. He was medicated, confused, and what he wrote would have completely shattered Mom. Let me be the one to determine that," I responded. "You have 24 hours to present that document to this court, or you will face charges of obstruction of justice." The next night, when I finally had the will in my hands, I understood why Marcus had wanted to keep it hidden. It wasn't because it harmed him. It was because it protected a deeper secret, one Harold Thompson had carried to his last conscious breath. The will itself was simple, dividing everything equally between both children. But the attached letter, written in the shaky handwriting of a dying man, revealed something that completely changed my understanding of the entire case. Harold Thompson confessed that he had always known Diane was not his biological child. He had known since the day Patricia confessed the affair, and he had consciously decided to love her as his own regardless. But there was more. The letter revealed that Marcus had also known since he was 16. Harold had told him when Marcus, in an adolescent outburst, had questioned why Diane always seemed to be the favorite. Harold had explained the truth and made him promise never to tell Diane, to protect her always as the older brother he was. And Marcus had done that. For more than 20 years, he had kept that secret, had carried that truth while Diane grew up unaware. The letter explained that Marcus's resentment had not begun with the revelation of parentage. It had started decades earlier, when a teenager had to process alone a truth that redefined his entire family. Harold wrote about the guilt he felt for imposing that burden on his son, about how he had seen Marcus gradually change, growing more distant, harder, and in his final days, Harold had tried to correct that mistake, tried to balance things materially while explaining the emotional ones. I closed the letter and looked out my office window toward the nighttime city. Tomorrow I would have to share this with both siblings. Tomorrow, Diane would discover that the brother she had accused of cruelty had been protecting her since they were barely adults. And Marcus would finally be freed from a secret that had poisoned his relationship with his sister for years. But tonight, sitting in the silence of my office, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what it means to be a judge. Not just interpreting laws or dividing property, but navigating the impossible complexities of the human heart, where love and resentment can coexist, where secrets kept with good intentions can cause as much harm as malicious lies. The final hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. When that moment came, I would have to look at two broken siblings and deliver a truth that would possibly destroy them further before giving them any chance to heal. And I would have to do it knowing that whatever I said, whatever sentence I issued, would be entirely inadequate to repair the damage of decades of family secrets. At that moment, I knew this case would haunt me for the rest of my career, because I had uncovered something no judge wants to face, that sometimes the whole truth isn't the salvation we expect. Sometimes it is just another form of pain we must learn to endure. Friday arrived too quickly. Throughout the week, I had mentally rehearsed how I would handle that hearing, what words I would use to reveal such a devastating truth. But when I saw Marcus and Diane enter the room, separated by their lawyers but united by decades of shared history, all my preparations felt inadequate. Jennifer Chen was sitting in the back, next to her an empty wheelchair. Patricia had had a particularly difficult episode that morning and couldn't be present. Maybe it was better that way. Some pains are too intimate to expose before a full audience. I began the session with deliberate formality, reading the necessary procedures, giving myself time to find the courage I needed. Diane looked anxious, her hands restless on the table. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed resigned, as if he already knew this would be the hearing where everything would fall apart. "I have reviewed the will submitted by Mr. Thompson," I began, my voice sounding firmer than I felt. "And I must inform the court that this document, dated 1 week before Mr. Harold Thompson's passing, does indeed distribute all assets equally between both children." I saw Diane straighten up, confusion crossing her face. If everything was divided equally, why had Marcus hidden it? The same question shone in her eyes when she looked at her brother, but he kept his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. "However," I continued, "the will includes a personal letter containing information relevant to understanding the full circumstances of this case. Normally, documents of such a personal nature would remain private, but given the accusations made in this room regarding motivations and character, I consider it necessary for both parties to know its contents." Diane's lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but she silenced him with a gesture. She wanted to listen. She needed to. "Listen." I read the letter aloud, word by word. I watched as the color drained from Diane's face when I reached the part about paternity, how her hands clutched the edge of the table as if she needed something solid to stay anchored. When I reached the revelation that Marcus had known for years, that he had kept the secret to protect her, she brought a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Marcus remained still, but I saw a silent tear roll down his cheek. It was the first time I had seen him cry throughout the entire process. I finished reading and left the letter on my desk. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Diane's irregular breathing as she processed decades of her life, redefining themselves in a matter of minutes. "Is it true?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper directed at her brother. "Did you know all this time?" Marcus looked up at her for the first time during the hearing, and the pain in his eyes was so deep I felt my own. Chest tightened. "Dad made me swear I would never tell you. He said he loved you just the same, that you were his daughter in everything that mattered. And he asked me to take care of you, to protect you from that truth, because he knew it would hurt you." "Then why?" Diane struggled to keep her composure. "Why have you been so cold to me all these years? If you were protecting me, why did it feel like you hated me?" Marcus ran both hands over his face, as if he could erase decades of accumulated pain. Because I was 16 when he told me. 16. And suddenly I had to pretend everything was normal while carrying that secret. Every time Mom hugged you, every time Dad defended you when you got into trouble, I knew why. I knew they were compensating. And I was angry. Angry at them, at you, at myself, but more than anything, I was angry at Dad for making me part of the lie. He broke then, completely. Marcus's shoulders shook with sobs he had probably held in for decades. But I kept the secret anyway. Because despite everything, you were my sister. You are my sister. And maybe Dad was right to ask me to protect you from this, but he was wrong to think I could carry it without it changing me. Diane stood up, and for a moment I thought she was going to leave the room. Instead, she went around the table that separated them. Their lawyers began to protest, but I silenced them with a look. There are times when legal protocol must give way to something more fundamental. She stood in front of Marcus, who remained seated, broken, and then she did something no one in that room expected. She knelt before him, took his hands in hers, and cried with him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea you had carried this. I thought you just didn't love me, that you resented Dad for preferring me. I never knew you were protecting me from something like this." I let the moment unfold, aware that I was witnessing something sacred. The justice I had sought to administer for weeks would not come from my rulings or sentences. It would come from this moment of raw truth between two broken people trying to find their way back to each other. Finally, when both had calmed enough, I resumed my role. The law is clear about the validity of this final will. The assets will be divided equally as set forth in the document. But I want you both to understand something. I paused, making sure they were listening. Your father made mistakes. Human mistakes born of misdirected love and the desire to protect. He gave you a material inheritance, yes, but he also left you a legacy of pain and secrets. What you do with both is up to you. I then dictated my formal judgment, establishing the terms of asset division, deadlines, legal requirements. But as I spoke, I watched these two siblings still holding hands, processing decades of misunderstandings together. When I officially closed the case, I did not feel the usual satisfaction of having reached a resolution. Instead, I felt the humility of recognizing that some wounds are too deep for the law to heal. The best I could do was create space for healing to begin. That night, back in my office, I filed the Thompson case away, but I knew I would never truly file it in my mind. It had taught me something fundamental about my profession. I had learned that the most painful justice is not the one that punishes the guilty, but the one that forces us to face that sometimes there are no real culprits. Only imperfect people making impossible decisions, leaving scars on those they love most. I received a letter from Diane 2 months later. She told me that she and Marcus were attending family therapy together, working through years of pain with the help of professionals. It wouldn't be easy or quick, she wrote, but for the first time in decades, they felt they could be honest with each other. Patricia had good days where she could speak with both, apologize for the secrets she and Harold had kept, explain that it had all been out of love, though poorly executed. The letter ended with something I will never forget. "Thank you, Judge Davis, for having the courage to force us to face the whole truth, even when it hurt. You gave us something more valuable than any inheritance. You gave us the chance to truly know each other for the first time." I kept that letter in my personal drawer, not in the official files. And every time I face a particularly difficult case, I reread it. It reminds me why I chose this profession. Not for the simple cases where the law is clear and justice obvious. It is for these complicated moments where the scales of justice must weigh not only facts and laws, but human hearts with all their capacity for love, error, and redemption. That case changed something fundamental in me. It reminded me that behind every file are complex stories of people trying to do their best with the imperfect tools they have, and sometimes the most painful sentence I can issue is the one that forces the truth to come to light, knowing it will destroy before it can heal. But that necessary destruction, that inevitable pain, can be the only path towards something like true peace.